1065? It's time now for Front Page Jacksonville, a show that delves into the issues that affect you. We believe in transparency and providing only the facts. And now, here's Octavius Davis.
Hey, we're back on the saddle. It's another Sunday here on Front Page Jacksonville. Thank you so much for tuning in. How has the week been for you? Hope it was enjoyable. And if the week did bring some challenges your way, hopefully, as you opened your eyes this morning, for those of us who are blessed to be able to do so, you'll be able to think on that very fact. Wow, I opened my eyes this morning. I'm blessed. I don't know how this situation that I'm going through is going to work out, but I'm going to be okay. Everything is going to be all right. I actually had that revelation recently where was going through a situation and I wasn't okay. You know, mentally, emotionally, I wasn't okay. But I said, you know what? I'm not okay, but it's going to be all right. And sometimes we have to have those moments of self-encouragement. So if you find yourself in a situation this morning where you're not okay, that is okay. It is okay to not be okay. That is part of the human experience. Anyone who would attempt to sedate or pacify away the emotional spectrum that we experience as humans, well, is attempting to make you inhumane. So it is okay to not be okay because everything will be all right. I am so happy. As a matter of fact, I couldn't wait to get back on this microphone today. Had I been given the opportunity, if Elroy Smith had called me yesterday, said, hey, Octavius, look, we want to start Front Page Jacksonville early. What do you think about cracking open the mic on Saturday afternoon at around 5 p.m.? I would have been here. Because yesterday, myself, my lovely, beautiful bride, my wife, and Wanda P., we each had an opportunity to go out and support the Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood with their march and rally in protest against the medical examiner's office and morgue that the city of Jacksonville has erected in the Brentwood community. Now, I have been talking about this story since December. I first heard about it in December. Talked about it very casually on the show, and as I read through the story, I remember saying right then and there, like, oh, yo, this is crazy. Who approved this? Who was okay with this? Well, then, fast forward, I think it may have been later in December or early January, was contacted by Sister Lydia Bell, the president of the Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood. She came in on the show, and I mean, Miss Lydia came in with all the receipts, all of the backstory in terms of how the city usurped ordinances to get this construction underway for this building. Well, if this is your first time listening to Front Page Jacksonville, and if you are not familiar with the story, I don't want to assume, so I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version. In the dead of night, and I say that metaphorically, in the dead of night, City Council approved for a morgue to be put up, a new medical examiner's office and a morgue to be put up in the Brentwood community. If you're familiar with 95 going north, if you could picture this in your mind, 95 north, when you get off on Gulf Fair Boulevard, you know Gulf Fair Boulevard, where the Gulf Fair flea market used to be, you know the hangout spot right there on Gulf Fair. Gulf Fair flea market used to be roped off every weekend back in the 90s and early 2000s. Yes, that same exit, that same Gulf Fair, okay? The same Gulf Fair that when you get off on Gulf Fair and continue right on past where the Gulf Fair flea market used to be, and you head on to the Gateway Mall. Yes, that same Gulf Fair. Well, today, in 2025, when you take 95 North and you get off on Gulf Fair Boulevard, as we used to approach Gulf Fair Boulevard as we're exiting 95, we used to see the building, the strip mall that was the Gulf Fair Flea Market. The very first thing that you see now as you come off that intersection is what looks to be a 2, maybe a 3-story building. It's a beautiful building with a panoramic view of Gulf Fair Boulevard and 95 North. Pristine windows encased around this structure. But here's the problem. That beautiful and pristine building that has been built is a medical examiner's office and a 300-body morgue. And not just a 300-body morgue, but it's with the intent to house bodies from 5 surrounding counties. Yeah, that's what is now at the epicenter of Gulf Fair Boulevard when you get off 95 North. And here's what's also crazy about the placement of this structure. Directly in front of that structure, as you're getting off of 95 North onto Gulf Fair Boulevard, there is another freshly renovated, and I could still smell the paint in the air yesterday as we stood there at the site. As you're getting off the Gulf Fair exit, there is a 1-story building that is directly in front of you, which sits in front of this building intended to be, and I'm going to start referring to it as that, intended to be the new morgue, because we're trusting and believing that that building is going to be repurposed. Well, let me tell you what sits directly in front of this building intended to be the 300-body morgue. It is a 1-story building that was intended to be a drive-through liquor store. A drive-through liquor store was intended to sit directly in front of a 500-body morgue. Talk about an oxymoron. How could JTA, how could the Transportation Authority, how could the Florida Highway Patrol put up any billboards at that intersection trying to discourage people from drinking and driving if they would have successfully launched that drive-through liquor store, and if the city of Jacksonville were to successfully open this medical examiner's office and 300-body morgue? How disgusting of a message would that have been? Well, here's the thing. This very same group that I referred to a moment ago, the Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood, they went out there when they found out about that drive-through liquor store. They went out there and they protested. They went to city council meetings so their voices could be heard. They raised holy hell because they did not want that drive-through liquor store in their community. Here's the unfortunate tragedy. As they were fighting against the liquor store, they did not know that the city had also already approved at that time for the construction of this new medical examiner's office and 300-body morgue. But the disrespect doesn't stop there. Because as you get off 95 North onto Gulf Fair Boulevard, and as you're approaching Gulf Fair Boulevard, that one-story formerly structure that would have been a drive-through liquor store facing you, and then directly behind that facility, this other building intended to be a 300-body morgue and examiner's office, to the right, to the very right of both of those structures, less than 500 feet from both of those structures, to your right on Gulf Fair Boulevard, sits Kipp Elementary School. Kipp Elementary School is a stone's throw away from both of those buildings. So when you see on social media flyers that says death is not welcomed in Brentwood, this is why. Because how can an educational institution filled with so much life, proposedly depositing into the heart and minds of the aspiring minds of tomorrow, the change makers of tomorrow, how can anyone worth their weight in salt say, oh, what we'll also do is put up a liquor store next to this school and a morgue? Nah, there won't be any psychological ramifications with this decision. How dare you? How dare you? So that's where we were yesterday. And I had an opportunity to speak with a few different individuals who were out there in support of the Brentwood community. That building that has now been erected, what the Brentwood residents are protesting is that, hey, city, halt your intent of making this a medical examiner's office and a morgue. Turn it into a skill center. Repurpose the building for something that is going to truly benefit the Brentwood community. Oh, there's another caveat that I forgot to mention. This same 2 or 3-story building that they've erected to be a morgue, it literally sits in the backyard of a military veteran. So there are residential houses in this community, all thanks to redlining in the African-American community. But in either case, while I was out there yesterday, I did have an opportunity to speak with a few protesters who are in support of the Brentwood community, standing against what the city of Jacksonville is going to do. The first person I had to speak with is Patty Brown from Eyes on Jacksonville.
The problem is communication, no communication. People in this community were not given enough time in advance to know that this morgue was going to be built here. They would have probably done a lot more of what they're doing today to avert this building here across the street from a school, okay, if they had known. But they didn't get the notification in time. I think that my understanding from some people in the community is select people were told about this, but not the people that get out here and campaign against problems in the Brentwood community. Brentwood community wants to take charge of their community.
Yes.
They want to be a part of what happens in their community, and things are getting done without their knowledge. And that's not right. That's politics. Now, do we need a city morgue? Absolutely. Absolutely.
But not right there.
Probably not across the street, which is not, I don't know, maybe it is 500 feet. You can tell me. But this is 32 feet from what used to be or what was going to be an actual liquor store.
Yeah.
And that's in violation. I don't know about the feet, if it's 500 feet maybe from this school, but the children probably don't need to be stepping out every day and looking at a city morgue. I mean, there are a lot of other things that go on with the city morgue, people being brought in, accident victims, things, terrible things that they would see.
It is not right. One of the beautiful things that I loved yesterday seeing was the diversity of representation from different communities, both around Jacksonville and outside of Jacksonville, who came out to support the Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood protesting this city morgue. Patty, whom you just heard from, she doesn't even live in Duval County. As a matter of fact, with her and I talking yesterday, we discovered that we're neighbors out in Clay County. But she heard about it and said, hey, look, something needs to be done about this. This is not right. So throughout the show today, I'll be playing excerpts from my time at yesterday's protest and rally, because it's not right. It is not right. Something else that I found interesting, and I did not know this prior to yesterday. Miss Lydia may have mentioned it when she came on to the show, but I don't recall. So the building that would have been a drive-through liquor store, I don't know what it's going to be repurposed as now, because thanks to the Brentwood community protesting the drive-through liquor store, they've abandoned that project. But here's what's interesting. So the gentleman who purchased that building to be the drive-through liquor store, he purchased that building for $150,000. He purchased that piece of property for $150,000. Now, I've shared with you on this show, I'm not ashamed of it either. Math is not my forte. It's not my strong suit, okay? I'm not ashamed of that. But I do understand money and how it works. So get this. After the protests and the Brentwood community raising Cain, when Mayor Donna Deegan got into office, the Brentwood community was able, I forget how the time frame worked, but they were essentially able to get her ear, position their issues with the drive-through liquor store next to the school. Mayor Deegan agreed, hey, no, that's not right. No, we need to make this right. So what the city did in an effort to make it right, they bought out the owner of the property that was intended to be a drive-through liquor store. Let me remind you, that gentleman paid $150,000 for that property. To buy him out and send him on his way, the city of Jacksonville paid that gentleman $1.8 million. My producer, Jack, just looked at me with the bug eyes. So Miss Lydia must not have mentioned this when she came through, because this is your first time hearing that figure, Jack. Yeah. $1.8 million to essentially go away. You talk about a return on your investment. When you put it in a pot and boil it down, he essentially paid less than 10% of what the city of Jacksonville paid him to go away.
This man pretty much paid what, $900,000 to buy, or he got paid $900,000 to buy this property essentially.
Yeah.
Which what the negotiation skills on him. Do you think they had a conversation, him and the city, or how do you think that went down?
Now, granted, we're speculating at this point, right? Because those are details that we don't know. I'm pretty sure there were some conversations that he had with the city. Would have had to, in
order to get the property in
the first place. But then, how did they agree on that number? Was that the number that the city wrote down and say, hey, sir, look, here's what we're gonna do. We recognize the inconvenience. We're going to write a number here on a piece of paper. We're going to slide it over to you. You know, is that okay? Is that fair? You know, or did he come with the number? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Mystery.
Don't know. But it's not right because, see, here's the thing. I've shared this with our listeners as well. I used to work in the education sector. And one of my previous roles in education, I was the regional director of operations for Idea Public Schools. If you're familiar with charter schools, if you're familiar with Idea Public Schools, one of my responsibilities, among many, was to identify locations in the city of Jacksonville for us to open up our new schools. During this time, neither of the two locations for Idea Public Schools, there's one on University Boulevard North, right next to Jacksonville University. There is now another campus on the north side off Lim Turner and Bassett Road, Idea Bassett Campus. And so we began the process of looking for our third location. So those first two locations that I just mentioned, those were already in the works. When I stepped into my role and on the scene, we began looking for our next campus location on the west side, which it's opening this fall. Idea Campus will be that campus's location. Well, as we were going through the process to identify real estate or land to open up the third campus, one of the things we could not get around was the city ordinance that says you cannot have a school that is within 500 feet of a liquor store. Cannot. And so we went and saw one particular property, and I remember the executive director for Idea Schools at that time. He and I, we went and we looked at the property. Like, man, this is some great land. Oh, man, we'd be able to do some outstanding things with this particular piece of property. But then we began having moral conversations. And the moral conversation as we looked at the scope, well, hey, look, there aren't any liquor stores near the school, but there is this ammunition and gun store right up the street. What kind of message would that send to our parents if we were to place a school right across the street, essentially, from a gun store? Considering the climate of gun violence across this country, specifically on school campuses, I don't like it. I don't like the potential message that could send. It doesn't feel right. And then we had a conversation with our guy who was over the construction. Hey, we need to find a different location. That is what the conversation looks and sounds like when you have responsible leadership who is interested in doing the best thing for the children, for the community. We would not have been able to sleep at night knowing that we had put a campus up right next to a gun store. There isn't an ordinance against that, but you know what is against that? Human conscience. Having compassion. Putting yourself in the shoes of the families, in the shoes of the students that we would have been asking to come to the school. Somewhere, someone in city council did not do that for the residents in the Brentwood community. So that's why we were out there yesterday. And that's why throughout the course of today's show, we'll be playing excerpts from that march and rally, because if you have not heard about it, we're going to keep shaking the table until you do. You don't have to live in Brentwood to care about what's happening in Brentwood. Stick around. A lot more is on the way. You're listening to Front Page Jacksonville.
Now back to the show that informs you and discusses the issues. Front Page Jacksonville on Hot 106.5.
Well, it's a continuation of redlining and Jim Crow. Basically, they have chosen to put a facility in a residential community. And the facility is a medical examiner's office and a morgue. And it's actually sitting in somebody's backyard. It's sitting in the backyard of a disabled veteran. And nowhere else in this city or any other place outside of an African-American community would a facility like this exist. And so what we're seeing is this continuation of economic exploitation that has been taking place in the community for well over 100 years. When you put a facility like this in a residential area, you lower the value of the property, you lower the value of the land surrounding the property, and you make it impossible for generational wealth to be accrued. And so one of the things that we're saying is this was done basically breaking many statutes and laws to get this thing put up. It was done, in a darker night, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they did not think they would have this resistance to this facility because it's a black community. And they don't see the black community as a community having any power. But what we want to show them is that we do. And that we're bringing the city together around this issue and other issues.
That is the voice of Todd Wells with Take 'Em Down, Jax. He'll be joining me on the show in the near future. Had a great conversation with him and so many others yesterday out at the march and rally that was hosted by the Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood. And if you're just tuning in, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Octavius Davis. You're listening to Front Page Jacksonville. The excerpt that you just heard was from the march and rally yesterday out in the Brentwood community against the medical examiner's office and morgue that the city is intending to erect there in the Brentwood community. So there'll be plenty more sound bites that I'll have for you throughout the course of the show today. But listen, this is Black History Month, okay? We still in the month of February. And I intentionally pronounce February as February. There's a backstory to it. Rest in peace to Apostle R.J. Washington. For those of you who, if you so Duval that you know about Titus Harvest Dome and Pastor R.J. Washington, you Duval, if you remember those tent revivals that he used to host, I'm talking about before he was doing them in downtown Jacksonville. I'm talking about way, way back in the day when they were doing them out in Caravan. That's how Duval I am. That was like late 80s when he was doing that. Either case, many years ago, he had a television broadcast, his ministry, Titus Harvest Dome. They had a television broadcast, and, they would do events in February. And, Pastor Washington, he's Jacksonville born and bred, was Jacksonville born and bred. I think he graduated from Raines. But he used to pronounce February as February. That's right, February. And that was so hilarious to me. Wanda P. and I, we used to crack up. And so to this day, she and I both, if we're having a conversation, and if either of us say February, we'd be like, that's right, February, So just one of those inside jokes. But shout out to the late, great Apostle R.J. Washington and his family and the many great things that they've done for the city of Jacksonville. Well, as I mentioned, this is still Black History Month. I don't care about no DEI dismantling and all that other rubbish. I don't care about that because that does not define who we are, and what we do. But I'm going to tell you something right now. If you don't have a subscription to the Jacksonville Free Press, one of the oldest African-American newsprint publications in the state of Florida, what are you really doing with yourself? How are you getting your information about things that impact the African-American community if you don't have a subscription to the Jacksonville Free Press. And no, I'm not getting paid for this advertisement. And yes, the program director and sales manager for the station may feel some kind of way about me promoting the Jacksonville Free Press right now. But guess what? It's 6:37 on a Sunday morning. They're not here. So I'm gonna, apologize later. I'm not gonna ask for permission. But let me tell you about this story. I just got mine in the mail yesterday. It is an actual newspaper. You hear this? This is ink and dead trees in my hand right now. When I do the show, I typically have all of my stories on my iPad, my nice electronic device, because, Jack, we've advanced so much in the world. I go to the news websites to get my news and information. But a few months ago, I was like, I got a problem with this because, regardless of the news outlet, you take your pick right here in Jacksonville, I was seeing too little information about things that are impacting our community. When I say our means African-American community. So I had Miss Lynn on the show, who's with the Jacksonville Free Press, a couple of months back. And I said, hey, look, I need to get a subscription to the Free Press because I need to understand what's going on. Y'all have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the community. And oh boy, do they. I'm going to share with you my favorite Black History Month story for February 2025. The Proud Boys. You're familiar with the Proud Boys? You've heard of the Proud Boys, right? MAGA, extremist groups, yada, yada. Yeah, the Proud Boys, them. That's who we're about to talk about very quickly. And I typically don't read an entire article. This is only 3 paragraphs. So please bear with me, but I promise you're going to love this. I promise you'll love it. Here's the title. Church vandalized by Proud Boys now controls group's name. The far-right extremist group known as the Proud Boys has officially lost control of its own name. And in a striking ruling, ownership now belongs to a black church that the group once sought to intimidate. In a landmark ruling, Judge Tanya M. Jones, I don't know if that's Bozier or Bozier, but with a name like Tanya, Tanya, she black. So I'm going to call her Bozier for today. She'll be Judge Bozier for this boss move she pulled off. Judge Bozier granted ownership of the Proud Boys trademark and name to the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. The decision prohibits, prevents, stops the far-right group from using its name or profiting from its branding without the church's approval. I love it. This ruling delivers a significant legal and financial blow to one of the largest extremist organizations in the U.S., setting a precedent for setting a precedent for holding hate groups accountable. Proud Boys chapters nationally can no longer legally use their name or symbols without permission from the very church they once targeted. The decision also clears the way for Metropolitan AME to seize any revenue the group generates from its merchandise sales, including hats and T-shirts bearing its name or logos. Happy Black History Month. I love it. That's how we move. We got to hit people where it hurts, in their pockets. So I might buy a Proud Boys T-shirt because Metropolitan AME is going to benefit from it. I might get a hat. I might change my social media. Look, I'm supporting the church. Shout out to Judge Bouzier and the Metropolitan AME. I'm just realizing I haven't invited you in on the conversation. If you'd like to comment on this story that I just shared with you regarding the Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C., now owning the trademark for the Proud Boys, or discuss what I've been sharing throughout the course of the show with the Brentwood community standing against the intended building that the city is intending to be a morgue and medical examiner's office in Brentwood. If you'd like to join the conversation, 833-758-1065 is the number to call. That's 833-758-1065. Oh, I love it. And speaking of Black History Month, now this isn't necessarily a Black History Month story, so to speak, but nonetheless, it's another story that I came across in the Jacksonville Free Press. And I'm just going to say something, and if you can feel this, say it along with me, okay? Now, one of the benefits of having a baritone voice, people hear me speak and they automatically think, oh, you must be so romantic. No, I'm not. Just because I have and I think Barry White may have set us baritone brothers up for that stereotype. Okay. But one of the things I enjoy about having a baritone voice is being able to do things like this. Bow, wow, wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay, bow, wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay. Bow, wow, wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay, bow, wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay. Oh, yeah. A little bit of Parliament, huh? George Clinton. Did you know he was recently in Jacksonville? George Clinton was recently in Jacksonville and was inducted into the Florida Hall of Fame. And that induction took place at the Florida Theater, right in downtown Jacksonville. Now, he's pictured standing next to Councilman Rockman Johnson. And this induction into the Florida Hall of Fame happened 1 week after George Clinton was inducted into the National Songwriters Hall of Fame. So shout out to P-Funk, George Clinton them doing what they do. Absolutely, absolutely love it. Now, as a kid, I remember watching the video for Dog, Atomic Dog. And I loved it. My brother and I used to laugh about it just because, you know, George Clinton, he's very animated, especially in that video. Well, a quick story that I'll share with you, and I won't get into all the details of the backstory, but my junior year of high school, I was hospitalized due to a medical condition that came out of nowhere one night. And so once my mom got me to the emergency room and everything, you know, doctors, they're working on me, whole 9 yards. They gave me, I don't know what this medicine was they gave me, like the good stuff. They gave me some of the good stuff. And I was zooted out of my mind. So one of the nurses, as they're walking me to my room, because I was in the hospital for a week, I had to be admitted and everything else, and so they didn't, the good stuff, they shot it in my IV, and so it was instantaneous, and I was feeling good, and so the nurse is walking with me as, you know, they're taking me to my room, and she's asking me questions just to kind of gauge my level of coherence. Asks me my name. Oh yeah, my name is Octavius. This, that, and the other. Well, do you know what day it is? Yeah, it's this particular day. She said, well, do you know who the president is? I said, yeah, I know who the president is. And I said it just like this, Jack, exaggerated speech and everything. Laying in my bed as they're wheeling me up to my room. Yeah, I know who the president is. This is like 1995, I think it was. 1996, something like that. The president is George Clinton. And everybody burst out laughing. And I'm trying to find out what's so funny. George Clinton is the president. Well, the P-Funk era was not the president. That was, Bill Clinton. But can you imagine if George Clinton had been president? Boy, I tell you, it would have been peace and love for everybody. Hey, stick around. A lot more is on the way. You're listening to Front Page Jacksonville.
Hot 106.5. It's time now for Front Page Jacksonville, a show that delves into the issues that affect you. We believe in transparency and providing only the facts. And now, here's Octavius Davis.
I think it's important for the community to be out here because they need to show en masse to the city of Jacksonville that when the city of Jacksonville passed a resolution dealing with the injustices of redlining here historically, I think that was a call of arms that if you're not going to do anything, the community is going to respond in kind. So although there are some people out here, the community needs to be a little bit more robust, in my opinion, in terms of showing up and showing out. Because if this morgue was to be put in any other part of the city, I think you would see a pushback, and you can easily see how the residents of those particular communities would feel some kind of way.
Those were the remarks of Anthony Brown of Redline Jacksonville. Listen, the city of Jacksonville approved a 300-body medical examiner's office and morgue in the heart of Brentwood. The residents were not informed about it. Their city council member, in case you're curious, who represents Brentwood, it is Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman. Did she fight on behalf of the Brentwood residents? I don't know. However, Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman will be joining me on the show Sunday, March 9th. I'm looking forward, and I love Councilwoman Pittman. Have a great relationship with her, have known her for years. And so I'm looking forward to having a healthy conversation with her about what's going on in Brentwood. But because the reality of the matter is, I don't live in Brentwood. So truthfully, she doesn't have to answer to me, but she does owe accountability to the residents in Brentwood. So I'm really looking forward to having her on the show come March 9th, right here on Front Page Jacksonville. I want to go out east for a moment. Shout out east. And look, I don't care what nobody told you about out east. If you don't know what out east is, here in Duval, that's what we refer to the east side. We call it out east. Well, recently, the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp announced that they would be changing their name to the Jacksonville Honey Drippers for 2 weekends. Just for 2 weekends. To pay homage to the Honey Dripper. Now, if you don't know what a Honey Dripper is, Jack, you know what a Honey Dripper is? Oh, my God, you don't know what a Honey Dripper is. I'm a
youngin', Octavius. I'm sorry, man. Put me on the game, man. Put me on, OG.
All right. Look, we have a guest in the studio I'll be getting to in just a moment. Let me ask real quick. Dr. Garland, do you know what a honey dripper is?
I absolutely do know.
Okay. We have Mr. Garland. Mr. Garland, you know what a honey dripper is? The terror in his eyes. He doesn't know what a honey dripper is. That's okay. That's quite all right. So a honey dripper. Oh, you talk about the epic summer treat for a child in Jacksonville, Florida. Oh, a honey dripper is a frozen cup, all right? Some super sweet Kool-Aid. I'm talking about gonna send your diabetes through the roof type sweet, okay? But in the bottom of that cup, there's like fruit, and we call it a honey dripper. Well, as I mentioned, the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, for 2 weekends, they're changing their names to the Jacksonville Honey Drippers. Well, in addition to that, and I really, really appreciate this very classy move on behalf of the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, because they also got with Michelle Kimbrough, my apologies. Michelle Kimbrough is the owner of the Honey Dripper House out east. And so the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, they honored her as they made this announcement, which I thought was absolutely stellar. So as we go into the summer, make sure you get you a honey dripper.
Broadcasting from the Anna Jar and Levine Studios. Anna Jar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Call 1-800-747-FREE.
That's 1-800-747-3733.
WHJX, Ponte Vedra Beach, Hot 106.5. Committed to gathering the community to speak about key issues that affect our daily lives. Download the free Hot 106.5 app to your phone to hear about what's coming up next. We are Hot 106.5, Duval's only R&B.
You're listening to Front Page Jacksonville. I am your host, Octavius, the $1 Million Voice Davis. As a matter of fact, you can find me on social media underneath that same handle on YouTube at the $1 Million Voice. As a matter of fact, this show, it is video recorded and placed on YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe to my channel at the $1 Million Voice. That's DA $1 Million Voice, not the. I'm not the $1 Million Voice, not THE. You got to put a little stank on it. It's DA $1 Million Voice. You can also find me at that same handle on Instagram, TikTok, on LinkedIn and Facebook. It's just Octavius Davis. I used to have the $1 Million Voice on Facebook, but somebody hacked my page like 2-3 years ago. All my followers gone. And I still haven't gotten back up to where I used to be, but that's quite all right. The world has changed, and I guess I got to change right along with those times. But either case, enough about me. I want to transition. We have a guest here in the studio with us today. Absolutely phenomenal in so many different arenas. Works in the field of education, but has a powerful backstory that led to her authoring a book that released this past summer, and is doing some things going into the spring as well as this fall to help promote and support other adoptees around the country. Please welcome to Front Page Jacksonville, Dr. Katherin Garland. Dr. Garland, how are you today?
I am well. Thank you for having me, Octavius.
Absolutely. Always a joy and a pleasure. Her husband is here in the studio. Always a joy and a pleasure to see this couple whenever out in the community, specifically surrounding adoption events. So let's jump in right there, if we may. Sure. I typically like to, have you tell the audience about yourself and let's talk about your education. No. Let's get right to the meat.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I find interesting, not only about your story, but also your cause, is helping adult adoptees just adjust in so many different ways. So you yourself were adopted.
Right.
So share with our audience, and for those who don't know, I also host a podcast called A Tribe Called Family that focuses on telling the stories of those in foster care and adopted and so forth. And so Dr. Garland was my guest on that podcast a few months back. So I'm familiar with your story, but our listening audience may not be. So share with our listeners a little bit about your backstory.
Sure, and I'm not sure how much to share, but so you can just tell me when.
Sure,
okay.
Absolutely.
So I was adopted when I was about 10 months old. Prior to that, my birth mother had left me in an apartment building. I'm born and raised in Chicago, first of all. So she had left me in an apartment building when I was about 5 months old. A janitor found me there. I was placed in, back then it was more like a group home situation. With other kids, and then adopted out of there when I was 10 months old. I am what's called a same-race adoptee. So a lot of times, I think people are familiar with transracial adoption, excuse me, where maybe somebody of a different race adopts a black person. But I was adopted by a black family, born and raised on the west side of Chicago. Did not find out I was adopted until I was about 10 years old, which, by the way, they do not recommend. You should tell someone that they're adopted by about 5 years old. Mm-hmm. That's the healthiest way. The way that I found out was like by mistake, and I put it in quotes because my mother was an English major, so we had a bunch of books around the house, and I was like known for just kind of being, a little curious. So I found a book on the shelf called Why Was I Adopted? I'm reading the book, and I'm pretty empathetic. So I'm reading about how, like, people give their babies away, and sometimes the parents can't take care of the baby, and that's okay. And I get to the end, and I'm like crying. I'm like, this is like a terrible story. You're telling me that people, like, somebody's like giving babies away, and they're not with their families, and my mom is like in the background.
Yeah.
And she just says, like, well, why are you crying? You shouldn't be crying. You're adopted. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So then now I feel like, sad for myself. At the time, I didn't understand, you're 10 years old, right? But we never, like, talked about it again. We never discussed what it meant to be adopted, why she adopted me, why she and my dad adopted me. It just never came up. Never came up. And because of her response, I think at 10 years old, I didn't want to, it seemed like I shouldn't bring it back up, right?
Sure.
But then my adoptive mother dies when I'm 16. And then my dad sends me to live with my grandmother, gives up his parental rights. So from there, I'm still not thinking about, like, being adopted, right? Which now I understand is actually a traumatic event. Yeah. Even from an infant. So there's not a lot of research about that, but people are starting to talk about it as more of a traumatic event than just like, oh, you get adopted and then you go get placed and live happily ever after. That was actually not my story. I did not live happily ever after. I had a lot of anxiety, depression that I didn't understand. And I ended up dealing with that in unhealthy ways, like developed some unhealthy coping mechanisms, but eventually began a healing journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And got introduced to the adoptee community. When I heard the word adoptee, I had never heard it. And I was like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
So I get introduced to this adoptee community by a very good friend now named Tarsha, who has her own podcast. It's called the Adoption Journey Podcast. Once I went on there, we became the best of friends, and then we created this nonprofit called Black Adoptees Meetup.
Yeah.
Because not only is adoption not really normalized, it is even more so marginalized for Black people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times, like even today, people don't quite. I'll have to explain, for example, like my grandmother's not my grandmother.
Yep.
And they're like, what do you mean?
And let's dive into that for a moment, because there is a level of tabooism within the African American community when it comes to adoption.
Right.
Right. Although we know it happens. Yeah. And sometimes it happens in informal ways.
Right.
Right.
Like kinship, right?
Exactly, through kinship, right? A relative, grandma, big mama, whomever,
right.
The kid's going to live, and then after a while, those children begin calling their grandmother mom.
Right.
Right. But I remember as a kid, my first introduction to the whole concept of adoption was the TV show Different Strokes.
Right.
Right. But that falls into a category that you mentioned. Is it transracial adoption?
Right. So that's called transracial adoption. And although there are many variations, I'll just say this. The most typical thing is that a white family adopts somebody of a different race. And a lot of times it's either a Black child or Asian is really popular. Now,
what are some of the challenges that can come along with that when you speak about transracial adoption? Because through the media, we see celebrities such as Angelina Jolie, Charlize Theron, and others who have adopted non-Caucasian children. Right? They're typically children of African descent. Right? But psychologically, what are, from your experience, from your research, what are some of the potential challenges that an adoptee can experience in a transracial adoption? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I want to kind of start broad. In general, what I've noticed and read and seen is that adoptees, no matter who adopts them, have identity issues.
Yeah.
And I mean, that kind of stems from being told that this is your family, being separated from whether you know your family or not. There's a separation, right? So we tend to develop identity issues. Now, add the layer of being adopted by somebody who is not the same race as you, you don't even have that connection.
Yeah.
Something really common is it's called genetic mirroring. And so what people who are raised by their birth families have is the opportunity to see like my husband's here, so I'll use him as an example. So he looks a lot like his dad.
Yeah.
Right? And you just take that for granted. So adoptees don't have that. So you're constantly looking for a genetic mirror, which kind of is linked to your identity. Like, who am I? Where did I come from? When you are transracial, you completely don't look like anyone.
Yeah.
A lot of times you have this cultural disconnect. So even something as simple as doing somebody's hair, right? You don't know how to do a black person's hair.
Yeah.
That would be, I think the identity piece is the biggest one.
Yeah, I was in a meeting, it's been almost a year ago now, and I was in a meeting with an adoptive mother, and transracial adoption, is her family dynamic. Mother's Caucasian, and this particular adoptive child is African American. And so it was a Zoom meeting, and, we're pretty much wrapping up, and so her son comes in. And he comes into the screen, and I say, "Hey, buddy, how's it going, man?" And he says, "Mom, he looks like me."
Right.
And in that moment, it definitely caught my attention. But then post-meeting, she and I had an opportunity to have a conversation.
Right.
And I appreciate her transparency and vulnerability, and said, "Hey, look, my son doesn't see very many African Americans, but African American men in particular. Do you know of any individuals that I could potentially get my son connected with?"
Right.
Because I can tell he's searching for something.
Yeah.
And as a mom, I don't know how to give that to him.
Can you imagine that?
No,
So
I can't.
just to broaden that, what I've, in talking to transracial adoptees in particular, sometimes what will happen too is you're not just in that family, but then you are disconnected from community, right? So you might live way out, and you're only surrounded by white people. Sometimes you go to school and you're only surrounded by white people, right? So you're constantly being othered, not just in your family, but in your everyday life.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that causes my mind to kind of spiral into a litany of questions, like when it comes to confidence and, that person's ability to really connect. And it makes me think about instances, and Jack, if you've never heard of this, you're about to get a peek behind the curtain, okay? You're about to get a peek behind the African community experience. Sounding white, acting white,
right?
Those types of things that have been, thrust upon certain people depending on how they carry themselves. But I can only imagine for an African American youth or individual of African descent who's been adopted into a transracial family, just the kind of impact that would have on them if they've never known. Look, I didn't grow up. We were talking about honey drippers a moment ago. Like, I don't know about honey drippers. We didn't have that in my community.
Right.
So when you talk about a same race adoptee, I think is that the phrase?
Yeah, so same race adoptee would be like if you, in my case, like I was adopted by a black family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the benefits, but also what are some of the challenges? We just spoke about some of the challenges with the transracial. What are some of the benefits, but then also challenges of same race adoptee?
So just in my experience as an adoptee, of course, one benefit is that I was constantly surrounded by people who look like me in terms of race. Now, of course, we still didn't look alike, which is what creates the identity piece. I'll also say there's a sense of belonging. A lot of adoptees tend to have issues with sense of belonging. And as a same race adoptee, ironically, I still had issues and still have currently sometimes issues with sense of belonging. I tend to not feel like I fit into places, but I would think that it's a lot less than if I was in a transracial situation.
Yeah. Sense of belonging. Let's talk about that for a moment. So I don't know if I've shared on this show, but I do believe I've shared with you, Dr. Garland, on the podcast. So my family dynamic, I have an older brother, 2 younger sisters. We have the same mom, but I have a different dad than my 3 siblings.
Yeah.
And so growing up, when you speak about looking for someone to mirror, my younger years, I was extremely quiet, very shy, and I never felt like I belonged. I didn't, and when I was experiencing this by and large, I didn't know at that time I had a different dad.
But you knew.
But I knew, right.
Right, we always know.
And so, you know, siblings are some of the most evil gremlins on the planet. And I'm guilty of being that type of sibling to my siblings as well. But like comments like this, because I'm darker than my siblings.
Yeah.
I'm darker than my mom. My mom is very, you know, we call them high yellow, right? Yeah. My mom is very fair skinned. And so growing up, when my siblings and I are, you know, being mean to one another, going back and forth, I heard that's why you adopted so many times.
Yeah.
But and I'm not adopted. And I'll share the backstory another day, okay, on how I came up. My mama wasn't cheating on nobody. Let me put that out there right now, okay? Life happens. But that sense of belonging, I didn't feel like I belonged. And quite honestly, as I be transparent with you and the Front Page listening audience, it's seldom that I feel like I belong in most environments.
Yeah.
And so is that an extension of perhaps just that the psychological attempts as a child attempting to figure out the environment because I wasn't adopted, but I can relate?
Right. Yeah, so, and I can only speak from my lived experience, right? But the way this seems to work is that because you're adopted, whether you know it or not, or even if you're not, your family is like your first community, right? And typically, in order to receive love, you figure out early on as a child what you need to do. Like, no matter if you're adopted or not.
Yeah.
You know, in my case, I learned I had to kind of sing and dance to get attention.
Literal or figuratively?
Sometimes. They have a story. I don't want to get off track. But they have this story of me, like, doing, it was called the bop back then. Yeah. Like, for an hour. And they had a video of it. And I'm, like, looking so tired because I'm just doing
Yeah.
Because I have all these eyes on me. But so literally, yeah, and then figuratively later on, I learned like, oh yeah, this is how you get love and attention, right? Yeah. And also being the best. But my point is, we all learn these things. But adoptees then are always trying to fit in. Like, what do I need to do to be a part of this family so that I can receive love?
Oof.
Right?
That's heavy.
Yeah.
That's really heavy.
Yeah, how can I belong? And then you see how that like connects to the identity part, right?
Did you experience that in your professional life as well?
Yeah, pretty much everywhere. Like up until maybe 10 years ago. And I have no problem saying I'm 50, about to be 52. Up until about 10 years ago, I had a huge identity like almost like a chameleon. Like, oh, you want me to? Is this what we're doing over here? I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would seek to imagine that even that trait of people pleasing falls. I was a huge people pleaser.
Yep.
In so many ways up until about it's been almost 17 years ago for me when I had a life experience where I decided to break away from it because my people pleasing had ultimately led me to a place where I nearly committed suicide because the thought of disappointing the people to me was more painful than simply just ending it all.
Yeah.
And so thankfully in that moment, I had a divine interruption is what I'll call it.
Yeah.
Where it was just long enough for me to get a different perspective.
Good, yeah.
And I had to make a decision. You know what? If I'm going to kill something, it's going to have to be this people-pleasing tendency.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and so for some people who recall who I was back then, and I have to separate it that way because I'm no longer that same person who I used to be. It was hard for them to digest because they're like, yo, dude, you're a little different. I'm like, nah, I'm just not playing to
I'm not doing it.
what you want to hear, so forth and so on. And so with there's so, and you and I, we can talk for hours on this, but we're close to the break. For someone who's listening to the show right now who may be an adoptee, but they may still carry some shame about it and not comfortable, how can they get connected with this community?
So specifically with Black Adoptees Meetup, we meet up once a year. This year we'll be in Chicago. So you can go to our Instagram, which is Black Adoptees Meetup it's just at Black Adoptees Meetup. We also have a website that you can check us out at. It's blackadopteesmeetup.org. So that's that part. I would also say, though, I encourage everybody to seek therapy, and not just any therapist. There are therapists who specialize in adoption.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great to know. Great information. And if they want to follow you, give your own Insta a shout out. How can they follow you on social media? You
can follow me at K.E. Garland.
There you have it, K.E. Garland on Instagram. And if you're interested, if you and your family have been speaking about becoming an adoptive parent, listen, it is a beautiful experience when you can provide a forever home to a child who may be in foster care. So it is a great experience, but I will encourage you, get all the information that you can first before making a decision. And if that is something that you're interested in, I encourage you to go to fssjax.org. That's F as in Frank, S as in Sam, S as in Sam, Jax, JAX.org. Dr. Garland, thanks so much for hanging out with us today on Front Page Jacksonville.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Stick around. More is on the way.
Front Page Jacksonville resumes on High 106.5.
The neighborhood. Why would they want to put something like this in this particular neighborhood when we have other places that are not so inundated with, families?
Yeah.
We have plenty of places, and it's really, really bad. I live on the other side of town, and I feel bad for the people that live here. And I would not want this in the middle of my community.
And fact of the matter is, no one would want a medical examiner's office and morgue in the middle of their community. No one would. Can you imagine driving down, let's say, Atlantic Boulevard, heading towards Jack's Beach? And as you're driving down Atlantic Boulevard, you approach Queens Harbor. And to the left of the Queens Harbor community entrance, you see a 2 to 3 story medical examiner's office and morgue. Or let's say you and your family, you're out enjoying a Saturday afternoon and you decide you want to go out to the St. John's Town Center, take in the sights, shop a little bit, eat some good food. And your favorite restaurant is now parked next to a 300-body morgue. Mandarin, traveling down San Jose, and right as you pass that little community near the Jewish Community Alliance, you see a 300-body morgue. No one wants to see the medical examiner's office and morgue out their front window of their home, out of the window of their child's school. They open the front door and they're met with the thought of formaldehyde. No one wants to see that. So why, on the Most High's good green earth, would anyone approve this in the Brentwood community? I'm going to get the brother Anthony Brown in on the show to really do a deep dive into redlining in terms of what it is, but also how redlining has absolutely devastated predominantly African-American communities here in Jacksonville, has done so for a very long time. Redlining is what demolished La Villa, the La Villa community right here in Jacksonville. That was thanks to redlining. The East Side, I was talking a moment ago before bringing in Dr. Garland and giving a shout out to Michelle Kimbrough with the Honey Dripper House out east. The East Side has been devastated by redlining. When you drive out east and you see all those industrial buildings and then right across the street, you see residential housing, that's thanks to redlining. The Brentwood community, unfortunately, did not escape that red pen. So this is why it's an issue, because nobody wants that in their community. Do we need it? Yes. Do we need it in a residential community? No. I find it comical that Jacksonville often touts about being the largest city in the United States from a landmass standpoint. So you mean to tell me this city with all this mass of land and the brain trust of the city of Jacksonville couldn't identify a better location for a 5-county morgue other than the backyard of a military veteran across the street from an elementary school? Come on now, do better. Do better. 833-758-1065 is the number to call if you'd like to jump on Front Page Jacksonville. Share your thoughts, opinions, or your concerns about any of the topics that have been discussed so far today. Now, this next story, I want to give a disclaimer and an apology. The disclaimer is because the nature of the story itself, it's not sexual, but it does reference, sex. So I want to just throw that out there. The apology is because you might lose a brain cell or 20 after I share this story. So once again, bringing an article to you from the Jacksonville Free Press. Here's the topic. Conception begins at erection. Law would make casual sex a felony. I know, just the title alone. A new bill in Ohio would make unprotected casual sex a felony for men, says State Representative Anita Somani. The Conception Begins at Erection Act has been proposed by Somani and State Representative Tristan Radar. The politicians believe that men should hold the same legal culpability that women do for pregnancies. According to reports, Somani has introduced legislation that would make it a felony for men to ejaculate without the intent of getting someone pregnant. The proposal wouldn't include sex that's done with contraception, like condoms or birth control. So that wouldn't be a felony if you use contraception. It also wouldn't include, what's a different word I can use for this? It also would not include self-pleasure. Or if the sex is done between members of the LGBTQ plus community who cannot get pregnant. The proposed maximum fine would be $10,000 per discharge. For all the trash people talk about the state of Florida and Governor DeSantis, I'm glad I don't live in Ohio with this proposed bill. And I'm sure there's a whole lot that I don't know and or understand about this proposed bill. I'm not sure that I want to. And maybe I'm being biased because I'm a man. I don't know. Maybe this is their effort to, abortion is a big topic. It was this past election season, especially here in the state of Florida. And, both sides of the aisle speaking about abortion and, what a woman should and should not be able to do with their body. What is and is not acceptable for a woman to do with their body. And so maybe this proposed bill is this particular senator's way of trying to match that energy. Now, I know what I'll do. Men think they'll tell us women what to do with our bodies. We'll tell men what they can do with their bodies. Ha ha, how you like that? Maybe that's what it's about. I don't know. But I do find it interesting, that last little line that they kind of threw in there real discreetly. Let me read it again. I mentioned that this felony, this casual sex felony bill that they're trying to roll out would not include self-gratification, nor would it include intimacy between members of the LGBTQ plus community who can't get pregnant. What is this really all about? So will it gain traction? I don't know. Will it get approval? I don't know. But I'm curious as to the motivation behind the bill. That I am curious of. What's really going on? A shout out to E-Dub. If you don't know, let me remind you, I am a proud graduate of the Edward Waters University, the emerging eminence. Okay. Shout out to Edward Waters University. They had Dr. Umar Johnson at the campus recently for their guest speaker series, Stay Woke. You know, I've liked Dr. Johnson for quite a while. I like some of the stuff that he says. Now, I'm not an avid follower of Dr. Johnson, but I would have liked to have been there for this particular event. And I haven't made it to one of the Stay Woke events yet. I will get there. They've had Charlemagne the God come through. They've had T.I. come through. Is it Tamika Mallory? I think I'm pronouncing that first name wrong. Let me see, because they kind of list some of the individuals here. Yes, those are pages that you hear turning. I have an actual newspaper here on Front Page.
Front Page, y'all should see it.
Yes.
I mean, Octavius, he's really looking the part, frilling it up.
Yeah, man, you know, I feel like an adult.
I feel like I'm walking into the living room, got Octavius sitting on the couch with his cup of joe.
Yes,
just
sir.
Reading that morning paper.
I'm official this morning, Jack. They've had Roland Martin, T.I., Tamika Mallory, so I was correct with Tamika's first name, Mark Lamont Hill. They had Nikki Giovanni, the late Nikki Giovanni. She was also a part of that series as well. I think maybe 2 years ago, a year or 2 years ago, she came through at E-Dub for the Stay Woke series. I love it. I love the fact that EW is giving the students, an opportunity to get that type of exposure because in times past, our college just wasn't doing events at that level. You know, I mean, I'm sure it may have been a funding thing, but shout out to Dr. A. Zachary Faison and his team for creating experiences for the students at the college. But what I also like about it is from the standpoint of the speakers that they're bringing in. It's a variety, because I think they've even brought in Dr. Cornel West at one point. There's a variety of the speakers who's having an opportunity to get exposure to Edward Waters University. Look, we are the oldest HBCU in the state of Florida. Show us some love. When y'all come to Florida, celebrities, there are more HBCUs in Florida than just FAMU. Okay? FAM ain't the only one around here repping for the culture. You got Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona. You got Florida Memorial in Miami. And right here in the 904, you got Edward Waters University. I need to get back. A couple of years ago, I was creating HBCU content. And it did really, really well. I allowed myself to get distracted. And I'll tell you why. It's Black History Month, so I'll be honest. I'll tell you why before we go to break. So I was doing this skit on social media where I was portraying each of the 4 HBCUs in the state of Florida. And each character had their own flavor reminiscent of their respective college. Case in point, FLOMO for those of you who know, we don't call Florida Memorial. We call it Flomo. Well, the Flomo character had dreads, gold teeth, and he talked with a mumble. Why? Because he's from the bottom, okay? That's what we call Miami, Dade, and Broward. We refer to that as the bottom. Well, people from the bottom, they kind of got that way about themselves. The FAMU character was very confident, but obnoxious. Okay? Thought he was better than all the other HBCUs in the state. The BCU character was laid back and kept everybody else in check. All right? And E-Dub was just, hey, look, man, I'm just here, okay? I'm just here trying to make a name for myself. Well, I came up with this one particular skit where the 4 HBCUs were kind of like singing this song about HBCU pride. And I'll admit on the front end, I had a lot of ignorance when it comes to certain things surrounding HBCUs. And so one of my areas of ignorance is that I assumed all HBCUs were founded by African Americans. But thank God for research. So as I was doing my research in preparation for this song, I discovered, much to my surprise, oh no, not all HBCUs were created by African Americans. And some HBCUs are named after non-African Americans. One such school is one of the meccas of HBCUs. Howard University is not named after an African American. The gentleman is quite white, and I say that with all due respect. Another one, right up the road in Atlanta, Georgia, Spelman University Spelman College is not named after an African American. Spelman College is named after the wife of John D. Rockefeller. I didn't know. I went to an HBCU and I didn't know. And so I kind of took a step back. I was like, I need to chill on this for a moment. I need to understand some things. And in my understanding, where I've come, grown, and have matured, is like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I appreciate the support. They help these colleges and institutions get on so that African Americans could have an institution for higher learning. And so I think I'm going to get back to the HBCU content. I miss it. I do. There have been so many things that have happened over the past couple of years, great content that I've missed out on due to me stopping that skit. So I'm going to bring that skit back. Follow me. Follow me on TikTok. Follow me on Instagram at The Million Dollar Voice. That's DA Million Dollar Voice. Follow me on social media at Octavius Davis. Octavius. There are not two O's in my name. There's only one O, and it's the first. Octavius Davis is how you can find me on social media once I start rolling back out that HBCU content. Hey, you're listening to Front Page Jacksonville. More is on the way.
Front Page Jacksonville resumes on Hot 106.5.
The main reason I'm out here today is I've been made aware that the process the city used was not according to the process that it should have. They should have made every resident aware that this was being built. They did not have the proper meetings. They did not hold the proper notice. And now these citizens are suffering, and they're already suffering enough. We know that a 52,000 square foot building in this type of neighborhood with these smaller homes is completely, inappropriate. In addition, this is a huge center for all of this process to take place. It's 5 counties, I believe, are going to send all of their dead bodies here, okay? It's not okay. And Brentwood suffers the brunt of all of these things. They tried to put crematoriums here before. They tried to put a drive-through liquor store a stone's throw from a school here. You know, the disrespect being shown this community is appalling.
That was the voice of Nancy Stotts. Nancy is a retired anesthesiologist. And I really enjoyed the conversation with her because off mic, we were just speaking about one of the questions that I asked her was, you know, this being a 300-body morgue, what's the likelihood that they'll be using organic products and materials to handle these bodies? She was like, oh, no. The chemicals that would be used, it would be hard for them to pull that off and the chemicals not impact the surrounding area. Yesterday's march and rally was beautiful in the sense that the community came together. Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood, led by Miss Lydia Bell, the goal yesterday was to have 300 people out there in support of the city not moving forward with their plans to open up the medical examiner's office and morgue, but instead repurpose the building by turning it into a skilled center. We fell shy of the 300. It was closer to about maybe 130 people who were out there, but that's still a win. We'll take it. The horns that you've heard in the background of the soundbite, they weren't blowing because people were in the middle of the street. We were holding up signs encouraging people to honk in support of the morgue not opening. And so throughout the afternoon, horns were blaring in support. Another beautiful thing about yesterday is that the diversity that was represented. Now, I didn't have an opportunity to talk with every single person there yesterday, but just based off of, I'm going to call it an eye guesstimation, giving it the eyeball test, most of the people who were out there in Brentwood yesterday did not live in Brentwood. They didn't live in Brentwood. But we understood that what's happening in Brentwood is appalling and it's not right. We understood that much. You don't have to be from Brentwood to have an issue with what's happening in Brentwood. You don't have to be from Brentwood. You don't have to be from Duval. But you do have to have a heart. You do have to understand the potential, and the potential ramifications is enough. The potential ramifications of the psychological impact upon the minds of children attempting to go to school on a daily basis, being met with just knowing dead bodies are over in that building. And if you're just tuning in, I mentioned at the top of the show, thanks to this same organization, Metro Gardens Association of Brentwood, they stopped a drive-through liquor store from opening up right there on the same block, literally less than 500 yards from the school, literally positioned right in front of this intended morgue. This same group, they stopped it. Despite people telling them, hey, look, y'all are old. Why don't you pack it up and go home? The deal is done. There's nothing you can do to change it. This liquor store is opening. But they kept fighting. They kept protesting. They kept going to City Hall, kept going to council meetings so their voices could be heard. And what happened? The liquor store didn't open. The liquor store didn't open. And so the gentleman who paid $150,000 for that property, that building that was intended to be a drive-through liquor store, The city turned around and paid him $1.8 million to abandon the project. So it can be done. There is power in people. And so it's not a private owner who's attempting to erect this morgue and medical examiner's office. It's the city. COJ. The town of Calford. So I don't know that the city would pay itself to abandon the project. But what the city can do is repurpose the facility. Turn it into a business complex, if not a skilled center. A skilled center is what the residents of Brentwood are asking for. So I attach my faith with the residents of Brentwood. Turn it into a skill center. As a component of that, make it a business resource center. Offer adult education courses. Allow small businesses to set up as vendors to rent out space inside the facility and for businesses that are servicing the Brentwood community. Oh, it can be repurposed. It happens every day. We see buildings that were put up intended to be one thing, but as time progresses, it becomes something else. I have seen buildings that were originally built to be a church after years be converted into a Chinese food restaurant. I've seen it. So, City of Jacksonville, we know it can be done. The question is, why are you refusing to do it? The residents don't want it. Oh, but, come election season, you'll want us to run to the polls. What this particular party doing on the other side of the aisle is wrong, but I'm going to fight with you. I'm going to stand with you. We're not going to let this happen. No, no, no. But one of the questions that I asked at the rally yesterday is, hey, by a show of hands, how many of you are part of the city council? Not a single hand was raised. Not a single one in attendance. Specifically, the one representing that district, Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman. Now, who was in attendance, I want to give a shout out to Audrey Gibson. I want to give a shout out to Representative Tracy Davis. They was there with the people in agreement. Shout out to you for standing with the people. Death does not belong in Brentwood. Thank you for hanging out with me today here on Front Page Jacksonville. Stick around. Health Beat with Wanda P. is coming up next. I'm Octavius Davis. I'll catch you next time.
Front Page Jacksonville, Sundays from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. For show episodes, go to hot1065fm.com. We are Hot 1065.